Brother Thomas was a man built for quiet. His world was the scriptorium of the Abbey of St. Aurelius, a place of dust motes dancing in sunbeams, the soft scratch of quill, and a profound silence that was a true language of God. For 20 years, he had found solace in the transcription of psalms and the illumination of manuscripts. His hands, stained with ink, were instrument of preservation, not a sensation. He preferred the company of vellum to that of men, for vellum did not lie, nor did it hide secrets in the hollows of its eyes. This preference for quiet made the summons from the abbot all the more unsettling. It was not the gentle call to prayer, but a sharp, percussive knock that shattered the morning's peace. The abbot's face, usually a placid mask of benevolence, was etched with a tension Thomas had never seen. "Brother Thomas," the abbot began, his voice low, as if the walls themselves were listening, "you are to be transferred, immediately, to the Cathedral of St. Lucian." A cold knot tightened in Thomas's gut. St. Lucian's was not merely another church. It was a leviathan of stone, a monument to divine power that dominated the skyline 3 days' journey away. It was the seat of an archbishop, a place of politics and pageantry, the very antithesis of St. Aurelius's humble devotion. But, "Father Abbot, my work here." Thomas gestured to the half-finished book of hours on his desk, its intricate foliage spilling from a gilded capital D. "Your work is where God sends you," the abbot interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. Yet his eyes, for a fleeting moment, held something else, not just command, but a flicker of pity. "Archbishop Valerius himself requested a scribe of your particular disposition, your silence, your obedience. He is compiling a new martyrology and requires a steady hand and a discreet tongue." The explanation was logical, yet felt like a veil. Thomas had heard whispers of St. Lucian's, tales not of its soaring spires, but of what lay beneath them. They called it the penitent's labyrinth, a place where the worst sins of the realm were sent to be cleansed. It was a place from which few returned, and those who did were forever changed, their voices hollow, their eyes haunted. As he packed his meager possessions, a spare habit, his personal quills, a small, worn crucifix, the abbot approached him one last time. He pressed a sealed letter into Thomas's hand. "Do not give this anyone but the archbishop." And Thomas, the old man's voice dropped to a whisper, his breath warm and faintly sour with wine, "keep to your cell at night. The stones of St. Lucian have ears, and sometimes they scream." The Cathedral of St. Lucian did not welcome, it imposed. Its twin spires clawed at the low-hanging clouds like stone talons. The great rose window, a kaleidoscope of saints and angels, seemed not to offer divine light, but to watch the approaching traveler with a myriad of colored eyes. The air around it was thick with the smell of damp stone and cold incense. Thomas was received not by the archbishop, but by a tall, gaunt man introduced as Brother Alaric, the master of the novices. His face was all sharp angles, his eyes the color of a winter sky, and his handshake was as cold and dry as bone. "Brother Thomas," Alaric said, his voice devoid of warmth, "the archbishop is occupied with matters of faith. You will be shown to your cell. Your work begins at dawn. You are to speak to no one unless spoken to. The rules of silence here are absolute." He was led to the cavernous nave, a forest of pillars that soared into a vaulted darkness, so high it seemed to swallow the light from the hundreds of flickering candles. The only sounds were the distant, mournful chant of the choir and the echo of their own footsteps on the flagstones. It was a silence more profound and menacing than any Thomas had known in his peaceful abbey. This was not the silence of peace, but of a held breath. His cell was a stark, windowless cube deep within the cloisters, colder than the scriptorium and smelling of ancient mortar, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood. That night, as Thomas tried to pray, the abbot's warning echoed in his mind. The stones have ears. He dismissed it as the superstition of an old man. But then, as the moon reached its zenith, he heard it, not a scream, not at first. It was a vibration, a low, resonant hum that seemed to rise through the very stone floor and into the bones of his cot. It was a sound of immense pressure, of something groaning under a weight it could no longer bear. And then, woven into that hum, a thread of pure agony, a choked, guttural cry. So distant it might have been his imagination, yet so visceral it froze the blood in his veins. He sat bolt upright, his heart hammering against his ribs. The sound faded, leaving behind a silence that was now alive with terrible implication. The abbot had not been speaking in metaphors. The stones didn't just have ears, they had a voice. The next morning, Thomas was brought before Archbishop Valerius. The man's chambers were opulent, lined with tapestries depicting the harrowing of hell and the triumphs of the saints. Valerius himself was a large man, with a broad, intelligent face and hands that were both soft from lack of labor and strong with inherent power. His eyes, however, were his most striking feature. They were a piercing, almost unnerving blue, and they held Thomas with an intensity that felt like a physical weight. "Brother Thomas," Valerius said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that filled the room. "Your reputation for meticulous work precedes you, and for your discretion." He gestured to a desk piled high with parchments. "The new martyrology. I require a scribe who can record the trials of the faithful without flinching. The path to grace is often paved with suffering. It must be documented." Thomas remembered the letter. He produced it from his sleeve and handed it to the archbishop. "From the abbot of St. Aurelius, your eminence." Valerius took the letter, broke the seal with a thumbnail, and scanned its contents. A subtle change came over his face. The welcoming warmth did not vanish, but it solidified like cooling wax. His smile remained, but it no longer reached his eyes. "Your abbot is a pious man," Valerius said, folding the letter and setting it aside without another glance. "He worries for your soul. He reminds me that you are a gentle soul unsuited for harsh realities." He leaned forward, his gaze boring into Thomas. "Tell me, brother, do you believe that God's mercy has limits? That there are sins so black, so corrosive, that they require more than prayer and penance to scour away?" Thomas felt a chill. I believe God's mercy is infinite, your eminence." "Infinite, yes," Valerius agreed, his tone smooth as oil. "But the vessel that receives it, the human soul, can be stubbornly sealed. Sometimes the seal must be broken before the light can enter. Remember that in your work." He was dismissed. As Thomas walked back to the scriptorium, the archbishop's words echoed in his mind. They were a theologian's argument, yet they felt like a threat. The work itself was straightforward, if grim, transcribing testimonies of heretics who had recanted, of witches who had confessed, of schismatics who had returned to the fold. The accounts were lurid, filled with descriptions of dark pacts and blasphemous rites. But as Thomas copied them, his scribes I began to detect patterns. The phrasing was too similar, the cadence of the confessions too uniform. They read less like the panicked words of the accused and more like a liturgy composed by a single, chillingly logical mind. Days turned into a week. The nocturnal sounds continued, a nightly symphony of suffering that frayed Thomas's nerves. He saw little of the other brothers, who moved through the cloisters with downcast eyes and sealed lips. The only one who ever engaged him was an old, stooped brother named Clement, the keeper of the cathedral's locks and clocks. Brother Clement was a relic, his back bent like a gnarled tree, his fingers twisted with arthritis. He spoke in a continuous, mumbled stream, mostly to himself, and was largely ignored by the others. One afternoon, as Thomas walked in the cloister garden, Clement was tending to a rose bush, his clumsy fingers fumbling with a withered bloom. "And the roots, you see, they go deep," the old man muttered, not looking at Thomas. "Too deep into the old ground, the ground that remembers the blood. They think we don't know. They think we can't hear." He looked up, his milky eyes suddenly focusing on Thomas. "But you hear, don't you, scribe? You hear the song they sing down in the dark." Thomas froze. He glanced around, ensuring they were alone. "What song, brother? What is down there?" Clement shuffled closer, his smell a mix of earth and incense. "The labyrinth, the archbishop's workshop, where he forges purity from sin." He let out a wet, rattling chuckle. "He calls them the instruments of grace. Iron and wood and stone, all shaped to open the soul. The Judas cradle, the head crusher, the pair of anguish, such holy names for such hungry things." The names landed like physical blows. Thomas felt dizzy. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you have a listener's heart," Clement whispered, his face suddenly grave. "And because I am old and the keys grow heavy. Someone must remember the true cost of this holiness." He pointed a trembling finger toward a small, almost invisible door of dark, iron-banded oak, set flush into the wall at the far end of the garden, nearly swallowed by ivy. "The postern of humility. The back way in. The lock is old, like me. It groans for oil." Before Thomas could respond, a shadow fell over them. Brother Alaric stood there, his expression impassive. "Brother Clement," Alaric said, his voice like ice, "the Archbishop requires your report on the clock tower's mechanism. Your ramblings are a distraction to our guest." Clement cowered, his moment of lucidity vanishing into a haze of frightened mumbles. He shuffled away, leaving Thomas alone under Alaric's frigid gaze. "The old man's mind is a ruin, Brother Thomas," Alaric said smoothly. "He fills the gaps with phantoms. Pay him no heed. The only labyrinths here are in his head." But as Thomas looked from Alaric's cold, controlled face to the distant, ivy-choked door, he knew with a certainty that chilled him to his marrow that Clement's phantoms were the only real things in this entire, God-forsaken place. The secret tortures were not hidden somewhere beneath the cathedral. He was standing directly on top of them, and the door to that hell was waiting. Silence was no longer a sanctuary. It was a prison. The quiet of the scriptorium was now a lid clamped down over a seething cauldron of horror. Every scratch of Thomas's quill seemed to write not the glory of God, but a lie. The confessions he transcribed were not documents of redemption. They were scripts coerced and composed in the depths below his feet. He was not a scribe or God, but a propagandist for a monster. He could not unhear Clement's words. The Judas cradle, the head crusher, they echoed in his mind, giving shape to the muffled cries that haunted the night. His faith, once a clear, still lake, was now a muddy swamp of doubt. What kind of God sanctioned this? What kind of church built its foundations on a charnel house? The turning point came when he was given the testimony of a young woman, a peasant accused of witchcraft for healing her neighbors with herbs. The document described her joyful renunciation of her demonic familiar after a period of contemplative correction. But Thomas, his eyes sharper than ever, saw the faint, brownish smudge at the edge of the parchment. A thumbprint in dried blood. In his mind's eye, he saw her, a broken doll, being forced to press her bloody thumb to the lie that would save her body at the cost of her soul, or perhaps end her torment in the fire. That night he did not pray. He plotted. The abbot's warning to stay in his cell now felt like a challenge. He had to know. He had to see. He had to find a truth that was not written by the hand of the torturer. His opportunity came during the Feast of the Transfiguration. The entire cathedral was filled with chanting and incense, a grand spectacle designed to showcase the power and glory of the church. The cloisters were deserted. Under the cover of the solemn, booming hymns, Thomas slipped into the garden, the moon a sliver of bone in the sky. The postern of humility was exactly as Clement had described, ancient, heavy, and nearly invisible. His heart thundered in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against the solemn chant from a cathedral. He produced a small vial of lamp oil from his sleeve and, with trembling fingers, worked it into the old, rust-scabbed lock. He held his breath, pulled the massive iron ring, and pushed. With a groan that sounded like a damned soul, the door swung inward. The smell hit him first. It was a complex, nauseating bouquet. The coppery tang of fresh blood, the stale odor of old fear, the foulness of voided bowels, and underneath it all, the cloying sweetness of incense, as if trying and failing to sanctify the stench. A narrow, steep staircase, worn smooth by countless desperate feet, spiraled down into a darkness that was absolute. The air grew colder, damper with every step. The chanting from above faded, replaced by a new soundtrack. The drip of water, the skittering of rats, and a low, rhythmic, metallic creaking. He emerged into a corridor that was not of rough-hewn stone, but precisely fitted blocks, cold and slick with condensation. It was a labyrinth, just as Clement had said. Torches guttered in iron sconces, casting a dancing, hellish light that created more shadows than it dispelled. The shadows seemed to move, to writhe. He passed alcoves that were not empty, In one, a monstrous wooden frame shaped like a giant X stood, its ropes hanging loose. The scavenger's daughter. In another, a large, spike will lean against the wall. The Catherine wheel. They were clean, maintained, like tools in a carpenter's shop. This casual, functional normality was more terrifying than any scene of active carnage. Then he heard a soft, wet, choking sound. He crept forward, pressing himself against the cold wall, and peered around a corner into a larger chamber. A man was suspended from the ceiling by his wrists, which were bound behind his back. His body was contorted into an impossible arch below him, positioned precisely to receive his straining flesh. Was a steep, pyramidal stool, the Judas cradle. Thomas watched, paralyzed, as the man, his muscles trembling with exhaustion, would occasionally slip, the terrible point of the pyramid finding a new, intimate purchase. A low, animal whimper was all he could manage. His eyes, wide with the pain beyond screaming, met Thomas's for a fleeting second. They held no plea, only a bottomless, vacant horror. Thomas stumbled back, his stomach heaving. He turned a corner and found another cell. Here, a device of polished wood and iron screws was clamped around a woman's head. The head crusher. Even in the poor light, he could see the slow, relentless turning of a screw by a faceless, hooded figure in a dark monk's habit. The woman's mouth was open in a silent scream, a thin trail of blood leaking from her ear. This was the Archbishop's workshop. This was the forging of purity. This was the breaking of the seal. It was not theology. It was butchery. It was a production line of agony, designed to manufacture the very confessions he transcribed in the sunlit world above. He had seen enough. His soul felt scoured, his faith shattered. He had to get out. But as he turned, a strong, bony hand clamped on his shoulder. He spun around, expecting Alaric, expecting a guard, expecting his own descent into the machinery of pain. It was Brother Clement. The old man's milky eyes were wide with fear, but also with a desperate urgency. He put a finger to his lips and pulled Thomas into a shadowy recess. "You should not have come," Clement hissed, his voice a dry leaf rustle. "But now that you have, you must see him." "Who?" Thomas whispered, his own voice ragged. "The one who does not break. The one whose silence is a louder heresy than any confession." Clement led him deeper, past chambers of unspeakable devices, to a cell at the very end of the corridor. This one had no iron door, only a heavy curtain. Clement pulled it aside a fraction. Inside, a man sat on a simple stool. He was emaciated, his skin stretched tight over his bones, covered in a tapestry of bruises, burns, and lacerations. Yet he sat with a straight back. His hands, though mangled, were folded peacefully in his lap, and his eyes were clear. They held a light that the darkness of this place could not extinguish. It was a light of profound, unshakable peace. Archbishop Valerius stood before him, not in his vestments, but in a simple, dark robe. He was not the imposing prelate of the chambers above. Here, he was a master craftsman, his sleeves rolled up, his face a mask of intense, frustrated concentration. "Your stubbornness is a sin against the Holy Spirit, Silas," Valerius said, his voice calm, almost conversational. "A confession is a gift. It unburdens your soul and strengthens the church. This silence, it serves no one. It is pride, the most insidious sin of all." The man, Silas, looked up at the archbishop. He did not speak. He simply smiled. It was a small, sad smile, devoid of mockery, full of a pity so profound it was more devastating than any curse. Valerius flinched as if struck. The calm on his face cracked, revealing a flash of raw, furious obsession underneath. "Do you not see? I am not your enemy. I am the physician. The corruption in your soul is a cancer, and I am cutting it out. This pain is my ministry. This is how I love you." Silas's smile did not waver. His silence was a judgment more absolute than any papal bull. Thomas understood. This was the core of it. This was not about heresy or witchcraft. This was about control. Valerius could not tolerate a soul he could not dominate, a faith he could not shape through pain. The man's unbroken spirit was the one thing the archbishop's instruments of grace could not touch, and it was driving him mad. Clement let the curtain fall. "He has been here for 6 months," the old man whispered. "They have used everything. Everything. And he has not spoken a word. The archbishop visits him every night. He thinks Silas holds a secret, a great heresy. But I think he just holds on to God, a God the archbishop has never met." Thomas looked at Clement, truly seeing him for the first time. This was not a rambling old fool. This was a sentinel, a witness. How have you borne this? For so long. Clement's face crumpled. "I oil the locks. I win the clocks. I bear witness. And I wait. I wait for a voice that is not afraid to speak of what the stones already know." Their eyes met in the torchlight. The unspoken pact was made. Thomas, the man of silence, would have to become the man of words. He would have to speak. The secret tortures hidden beneath the cathedral would remain a secret no more. The world above had lost its color. The soaring hymns of the cathedral now sounded like the wails of the damned. The incense smelled of burning flesh. Thomas moved through his duties like an automaton, his body in the scriptorium, his soul still trapped in the geometry of suffering below. He could not unsee Silas's peaceful eyes. He could not unhear Valerius's desperate, twisted declaration of love through torture. The blood-stained thumbprint on the peasant girl's confession was now a brand on his own conscience. He was complicit. His silence, his transcription of lies, had helped build the walls of this hell. That night, in the absolute blackness of his cell, he made a decision. He would not run. To flee would be to abandon Silas, to abandon all the others, and to allow the machine to continue its grisly work. His weapon was not a sword, but his quill. His battlefield was not a field, but the page. He began to write, not a confession, but a testament. He wrote by the faint, treacherous light of a single candle, his hand moving with a speed and certainty he usually reserved for the holy texts. He did not write as Brother Thomas, the humble scribe. He wrote as a witness. He described the postern of humility, the spiral staircase, the cold, precise corridors. He named the devices, the Judas cradle, the head crusher, the pair of anguish, not as instruments of grace, but by their true, horrific names. He described the broken bodies, the vacant eyes, the smell, and he wrote of Silas. He wrote of the man whose unbroken faith was a living condemnation of the archbishop's entire enterprise. He wrote of Valerius's obsession, his fury in the face of a peace he could not comprehend or conquer. He detailed the dates, the times, the specific, chilling dialogues he had overheard. This was not an accusation based on rumor or the ramblings of an old man. It was a forensic document, a scribe's report from the gates of hell. He wrote until his hand cramped and the candle guttered out, leaving him in a darkness that was now filled with the power of his own defiance. The document was written, but was a stillborn child if it remained within the walls of St. Lucian. It had to escape. It had to find its way into the world, to the other abbots, the bishops who were not under Valerius's thrall, perhaps even to Rome itself. His only ally was Clement. The next day, during the communal meal where silence was enforced, he managed to slip a small, folded note into the old man's gnarled hand. It contained only 2 words, the world. Clement's eyes met his, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod. The plan was fraught with peril. The cathedral was a sealed fortress. All correspondence was monitored by Brother Alaric. No one entered or left without scrutiny. But Clement, as the keeper of the locks, had a sliver of freedom. He was responsible for the tradesmen who maintained the clock tower and the great organ. One of them, a clockmaker from the town known for his loose tongue and his dislike of the cathedral's arrogance, was their only hope. For 3 agonizing days, Thomas waited, the rolled-up parchment hidden in his sleeve feeling as heavy as a bar lead. He attended Mass, he transcribed his lies, he felt the archbishop's gaze upon him more frequently, as if the man could smell the treason on him. On the 4th day, the clockmaker arrived. Thomas, from the scriptorium window, watched Clement shuffle with him toward the tower. This was the moment. His heart was a wild bird beating against the cage of his ribs. He saw Clement engage the man in conversation, pointing to various parts of the mechanism. He saw the old man's hand, quick as a bird's peck, slipped the parchment into the leather tool bag slung over the clockmaker's shoulder. It was done. The word was out. Now, they could only wait and pray that the clockmaker's curiosity would outweigh his fear. The reckoning came not from outside, but from within. That evening, as the monks filed into the choir stall for vespers, the atmosphere was different. The air was charged, electric. Archbishop Valerius himself was presiding, his face a mask of stone. Brother Alaric stood beside him, his eyes scanning the rows of monks like a hawk. The service began. The psalms rose into the vaulted ceiling, but the harmony was strained, brittle. Thomas sang, his voice a thin, reedy thread in the great chorus, his entire being focused on projecting normalcy. Then, halfway through a hymn, the great west door of the cathedral burst open. The clockmaker stood there, not alone. Beside him was the town's burgomaster, his face pale but resolute. And behind him, a crowd of townspeople, their faces a mixture of fear, anger, and grim determination. In the burgomaster's hand, he held Thomas's parchment. The singing died in a ragged gasp. The organ wheezed into silence. Valerius rose slowly from his throne. The power in him was palpable, a force that filled a vast space. "You defile God's house with this mob?" His voice boomed, without need for amplification. The burgomaster, though trembling, held his ground. He unrolled the parchment. "We come with grave questions, Your Eminence. Allegations of unspeakable acts, of a prison beneath this holy place, of torture." A murmur rippled through the monks. Some looked down, ashamed. Others looked up, their own long-suppressed doubts now given voice. The ravings of a disgruntled tradesman and the lies of a heretic. Valerius thundered, his composure cracking. His eyes swept the choir stalls and found Thomas. They pinned him there, fed to him by a serpent in our own garden, a scribe who prefers the fiction of heresy to the hard truth of divine justice. It was the moment. The silence he had cherished his whole life was now a weapon to be used against him. To remain silent now was to die, not just physically, but spiritually. He would be erased, just like the victims below. Thomas stood up. His legs felt like water, but his voice, when it came, did not tremble. It was clear and sharp, a lance of truth in the cathedral's oppressive gloom. "It is not fiction." Every eye turned to him. The silence was absolute, heavier than any he had ever known. "I have seen it," Thomas said, his voice gaining strength, carrying to the farthest corner of the nave. "I have walked the penitent's labyrinth. I have seen your instruments of grace. I have seen the man, Silas, whom you torture not for heresy, but for a faith so pure your tools cannot break it. The archbishop does not cleanse souls here. He breaks them for his own glory. He is not a physician. He is a torturer. And this cathedral is built on a foundation of screams." He spoke the words he had written. He described the sights, the sounds, the smells. He gave the horrors a name. He pointed to the ivy-choked postern of humility. He looked directly at the burgomaster and the townspeople. "The door is there. See for yourselves the cost of this man's holiness." Chaos erupted. Valerius was shouting, his face purple with rage. Alaric moved towards Thomas, but the crowd of townspeople, emboldened by the raw, undeniable truth in the monk's voice, surged forward, blocking his path. In the tumult, Thomas saw Clement, standing in the shadows of a pillar. The old man was not mumbling. He was weeping, but he was also smiling. The waiting was over. Epilogue, the echo that remains. Thomas's speaking was the pebble that started the avalanche. The burgomaster and his men, armed with crowbars and righteous fury, opened the postern of humility. What they found confirmed every word Thomas had spoken. The labyrinth was emptied. The broken victims were carried into the light. Silas among them, his step frail but his head held high. Archbishop Valerius was summoned to Rome to answer for his crimes. He died on the journey. Some said of fever, others whisper of a broken heart. His life's work exposed as a monument to sadism disguised as piety. Brother Alaric vanished into the shadows from whence he came. The Cathedral of St. Lucian still stands. Its spire still claw at the sky. Its rose window still watches the world. But it is a different place now. The silence within is no longer menacing, but contemplative, a silence of remembrance, not of secrets. Brother Thomas never returned to the quiet scriptorium of St. Aurelius. His vocation had been irrevocably changed. He became the keeper of the story, the guardian of the truth. He established a small hospice in the town below the cathedral, dedicated to healing the wounds, both physical and spiritual, that the labyrinth had inflicted. He never wrote another illuminated manuscript. His masterpiece was a single, plain piece of parchment, now held in the town's archives. A testament of horror, written in a simple, steady hand. A document that began with the words, "I, Brother Thomas, a scribe of God, bear witness," and sometimes on the quietest of nights, when the wind sighs through the cloisters, the old townspeople say you can still hear it. Not a scream, but a whisper, the echo of one monk's voice, the sound that brought a leviathan of stone to its knees. A reminder that the light shines in the darkness, and that the darkness, no matter how deep, can never, ever extinguish it.